Always check for the lipstick. I think if I'm sitting here, that's okay, right? Neighbors can definitely see me. Ça va, maybe you can learn French. All right, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do it. Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à Blabla Katie. My name is Katie and today we're going to blabla about how to find a job in France after the pandemic. This is the first video that I'm making that isn't necessarily a French language lesson. And this is because I assume that if you are trying to learn or improve your French, most likely you want to use this French someday. So I've decided to do 2 videos a week. Saturdays are still going to be designated for the actual language lessons, but on Wednesdays, I'm going to start publishing videos that have to do with more real-world situations and sort of the logistics behind moving to or studying in or traveling to a country that speaks French. You don't need me to tell you that the pandemic has changed the way that literally the whole world works. Now that the United States is starting to really roll out its vaccines, more and more people are starting to get vaccinated, and I think a lot of people are sort of starting to think about what they want to do once the world opens up again. So in this video, I want to give you some advice and some tips as to what you can be doing now to prepare for a job in France after the pandemic. But first, I want to talk about specific job restrictions that apply to people outside of the EU, and I of course am most familiar with the American case, but this could also apply to anyone who is not a citizen of the countries in the European Union. If you are not a part of the European Union, you can only stay in France for up to 90 days, that's 3 months, unless you have a different visa that states otherwise. A visa is simply documentation that tells you how long you can stay in France and for what purpose, but this isn't something that you can just simply apply for. 2 of the most common visas that people use to stay in France beyond the 90-day period are student visas and work visas. You either have a university sponsoring your stay, vouching for you that you can stay for however long it is that their visa lasts for, or you have an employer saying that you have a contract that lasts again up until a specific amount of time. During that time period, they are sponsoring your stay. So if you do not have a university or an employer, and there are a couple other cases in which you can get a visa, then you have to leave France at the end of 90 days. This means that Americans and other citizens outside of the EU are already pretty limited when it comes to looking for jobs in France, but there are still opportunities even in the midst of a pandemic. Speaking of which, I think it is also really important to just be realistic about the situation in France. As of today, the day that I'm filming is April 16th. The only people who can get a vaccine are people over the age of 60, healthcare professionals, people who already have coexisting conditions, and a couple other groups as well. France has actually recently entered another lockdown, and you can't even enter France from the United States unless you have a specific exemption that you have to document. That being said, according to the same government website, they are anticipating that any willing adult will be able to have access to the vaccine by the end of the summer. Of course, anticipating something and having that anticipation become a reality are 2 very different things, but I think that that's at least a positive prediction, and regardless, in the meantime, it doesn't mean that you have to be a sitting duck. It doesn't mean you have to wait for the world to open up before you start making moves to apply for jobs in France. So keeping in mind both the visa restrictions that are placed on Americans and other people outside of the EU, as well as the current situation in France, the first piece of advice that I want to give you is to look for remote jobs that are based in France. That's because these online positions may potentially turn into in-person opportunities once it's safer and more feasible to do so. For example, I recently accepted a part-time position teaching English online to French business professionals, and while this job is online for now, I know that before the pandemic, they had teachers who would teach in person. So there's a possibility that once it's safer to go back to France, that this company might sponsor a visa for me. It's not a guarantee, but it's a good place to start. I found this specific position on Upwork.com, which is essentially a third-party website where individual clients or companies will post job postings, and then individual freelancers will apply to them directly on the site. So that's where I found this position, but I would recommend using as many career search databases as you can, whether that is simply Google, Indeed.com, and I would recommend typing in whatever your position is that you're looking for in both French and English. Try 2 separate searches, because some postings might only be in French. I would also apply to other positions that are normally in person and that will definitely go back to being in person once it is safe to do so. For example, you can apply to TAPIF or TAPIF, which stands for the Teaching Assistant Program in France. The application period for TAPIF is already passed for the 2021-22 academic school year, but I think later in the school year, you will be able to apply for the 2022-23 academic year. And if you're not sure what TAPIF is, I do have plans to create more Wednesday videos specifically on this program, so make sure to subscribe if you don't don't want to miss those. You can also look into 2 different positions in which you can teach English or another language, as long as it's your native language, at French universities. The first position is called a lecteur or a lectrice if you want to make it feminine, and the other position is called a maître de langue. I've applied to both of these positions in several different universities for English. Of course, it's going to vary across universities, but from what I've gathered online and from reading blogs, you are teaching more contact hours for the lecteur position for a little bit less pay, whereas for the maître de langue position, you are teaching a little less contact hours for a little more pay, but there is a lot more preparation involved because you are in charge of your own specific classroom. I'm applying to both of these positions now, so as I gather more information, I can also make more videos on these specific roles. If you're interested in finding a position for a lecteur or maître de langue, what I did was simply go onto Google, and in French, I wrote lecture d'anglais 2021-2022. If you're interested in these positions, I would say to start looking into them as soon as possible. Each university is going to have a different application deadline, and they're going to have a different timeline for interviews and for letting you know if you were accepted or not. So for sure, keep scouring Google and apply to any of the positions that seem like a good fit for you. If you are still waiting for applications to open, then I would recommend that you take this time to prepare your materials. So create a French CV, a French cover letter, practice interviewing in French, because even if the position is in English, they might still want to make sure that you have enough French to be able to get by on the day-to-day tasks. And if you feel like you don't exactly know how to do any of these things, I will be creating videos on each part of the French application process, so you'll want to go check those out. And finally, if possible, get vaccinated. Make sure that you are as protected as possible, not only for your own well-being and for those of the people around you, but also so that if this question comes up in an interview, you can easily say, yep, I'm vaccinated, not an issue. And that way it's one less obstacle to getting a job in France after the pandemic. If you are applying to and are accepted to any of these positions, TAPIF, being a lecteur or maître de langue at a university, your employer will be sponsoring your visa, which means that you won't have to worry about the travel restrictions and you'll be able to stay in France for longer than 90 days. Now, once more people are vaccinated and the world at large is just more protected against the virus, then you can also start reconsidering short-term jobs that wouldn't necessitate a visa and jobs that would be completed in less than 90 days. There are so many short-term jobs that you can look into. You can work at a hostel, you can be an au pair, you can do other odd jobs, and I would recommend going onto workaway.info. You can choose any country that you want to work in and you'll see a bunch of listings. And normally, these jobs aren't going to be super high paying, but oftentimes you will get room and board in exchange for some sort of daily labor. And I will put all the links that I'm talking about in the description box below. And lastly, I would say once travel restrictions are lifted, once you are vaccinated, and if you're not at all concerned about staying in France for longer than 90 days, something that you can do is move to France and simply do remote work for the 90 days. For example, you could be teaching English online with a company that has nothing to do with France, or you could be doing your own job based in the United States or whatever other country it is while you're in France. You can do this for up to 90 days, and I have heard of people who simply leave after the 90 days, go visit somewhere else for like a week or so, and then come back, therefore being eligible for another 90 days in France. To be honest, I don't know how long this would work for. I don't know if you would get into trouble with it. So I'm not saying it's a foolproof idea, but I have heard of other people doing it if that is something you're interested in as well. So to recap, to find a job in France after the pandemic, you need to use the time that you have right now to start looking into jobs that you would potentially be interested in. Try to find remote jobs that are based in France that could potentially turn into a visa sponsorship once it's possible to be in person again. Look for jobs that will definitely return to being in person once it is safe to do so, and that would definitely sponsor you, or simply wait for all of the travel restrictions to be lifted so that you can go to France for a period of 90 days and work short term. In the meantime, make sure that you are preparing all of the necessary materials for the application process and that you're taking all of the necessary health precautions like getting vaccinated. So that is all the advice that I have for you on what you can do now to find a job in France after the pandemic. If you got any value out of this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And that's all for now. À la prochaine!